Hi, I'm Candice Matthews-Brackeen, and welcome to Women's Tech Week. On today's episode, we'll be chatting about leadership with Kimberly Bryant. Kimberly is a visionary leader in the technology sector, renowned for her groundbreaking work in championing diversity, equity, and inclusion. With an impressive background in electrical engineering from Vanderbilt University, Kimberly has leveraged her expertise and leadership skills to address the systemic underrepresentation of women of color in STEM fields. As the founder of Black Girls Code, she has not only introduced thousands of young girls to the possibilities within technology and computer science, but has also established herself as a key figure in the movement toward a more inclusive tech industry. Bryant's ability to inspire, engage, and mobilize around the cause of diversity in tech demonstrates her exceptional leadership skills. Her journey is a testament to the power of vision, resilience, and advocacy in creating systemic change. Her enduring commitment to breaking down barriers and building a more inclusive future in technology makes her a formidable leader and an inspiring figure in the global tech community and amongst many women in leadership. Welcome to the show today, Kimberly.
It's great to see you again.
It's really good to see you. So tell me where you are today.
I am actually in California, in Oakland, California. It is it's sunny, but it's a little bit overcast too. But at least it's not snowing and torrential rain. So I'm happy with that.
And, you've moved to a new org. You're the CEO of the Black Innovation Lab. Can you tell me a little bit about BIL?
Yes. So what I wanted to do in this next stage of my career journey was really find ways to support other founders and innovators like myself. So I started innovating 10 years ago with my nonprofit, but I've been an innovator. I really feel like that's like part of my DNA. And what I found after I was making a transition from the nonprofit space is that there were challenges that were shared by, both women as well as other marginalized founders, whether they were building for-profit or nonprofit companies. They were very similar: lack of funding, difficult to scale, trouble managing partners, certainly challenges managing board relations and such. And I was like, something needs to be done in this space to support folks that are innovators like myself. And I wanted to be able to share some of the lessons that I learned. Many of them I learned the hard way, but I wanted these founders to learn those lessons. But I also wanted to be able to write a check. So I didn't want to there's a lot of advice. I didn't want to just be able to give advice. I wanted to be able to give some tangible support, even if that was a little, because I found that gap for most marginalized founders to get that first check. It's like small, like $50K to $100K. It's a small first check that we're often very challenged to even meet that first hurdle. And so this idea started to kind of incubate in my head around how would I do that. And creating this accelerator, Black Innovation Lab, sort of formulated from that seed of an idea to support folks that look like me, had similar experiences. And then it was just an added benefit that an opportunity to go back to my hometown in Memphis and build became a key part of the thread that kind of led me to being on this next journey again. Like I'm innovating all over again, just like the founders I'm trying to help. And you of course know how that is when you're building something. It's like, woo, it's not for the weak, but I'm really passionate about this because it's an opportunity not only for me to share like all the things that I've learned, but to be able to go back home. It's like a full circle moment for me.
That's amazing. So you've got this kind of new team that you're forming. What does your leadership style look like today?
Oh, that's a great question. Like, I feel like my leadership style has certainly evolved over the years, but it has, I want to say, transformationally evolved, and I want to say transformed over the last 2.5 years. I think I've always considered myself a visionary and a very strategic person, and I am still that. Like get these ideas and I'm really, I want to say that an itch, like there's when I'm troubled about something that's not right in the world, I have to figure out how to solve it. And then I try to run away from it, but then it follows me there. And I was like, yeah, if nobody else is going to do this, I need to do it. So the strategic visionary piece is something that I feel very comfortable in that role, and I do very well. I think when I have been leading efforts in the past, I've taken on this very dynamic, very direct leadership approach and getting things done a certain way and to certain standards, and being very rigid with that in terms of what my expectations were. And I think in ways that's not bad. I think that is how I was able to scale, a nonprofit organization from literally nothing to this unicorn startup that, sitting on this a significant endowment. I think it took that, especially as a Black woman in the tech space. But now I really see myself asking to others to kind of fill in the gaps that I have, like the folks that are more operationally focused, and bringing those folks onto my team. I'm leaning on folks to be collaborative in a way that I don't have to do all of the things myself, and bringing folks onto my team, and also working outside of our team with other partners to collaborate in a much more dynamic and direct way than I did in the past. And I think for me, it's I call this like my softer leadership path, and also because I don't want to burn out. I think I was always on the cusp of burning out in this last decade when I was building, the nonprofit movement with around Black Girls Code. And I don't want to work that way this time. I want to be a little bit gentler, not only on the folks that are working within my team, but on myself. And so finding ways to kind of share the load with others has been something that has really evolved for me over the last 2.5 years or so.
That makes a lot of sense. So besides being a leader, you are also an activist,
Mhm.
and lend your voice to lots of different topics. And not too long ago, you wrote an article after Dr. Claudine Gay resigned, and you discussed something called the Black girl paradox. What is that?
Yeah. So one of the things that I am so glad you brought that up, it's called the Black Girl Boss Paradox.
Black girl
And
boss paradox.
the
Thank
Black
you.
Girl Boss Paradox. And this is something I think I was observing this phenomenon before I actually had a name for it. I have been observing it for the last decade. You and I started doing our work in the tech space right in, I want to say, a couple of years before this thing called the girl boss movement, with Glossier and all of those companies that were run by these amazing women founders, white women founders, really came into the limelight. And I noticed that during that period of time, even in my work on the nonprofit side, there were other Black women like myself and like you and like Catherine Finney and others that were building these amazing movements. Angela Benson, there were many of us there. We didn't get that spotlight. We were not on magazine covers for the most part. We weren't getting, in the beginning, millions of dollars in funding to scale. And we weren't the celebrity darlings of the tech or business world like our counterparts and peers were. Even though we were doing things just as significant and impactful in our work, we were not getting that spotlight. Media was not interested in us and what we were doing. And I found that interesting, but I was still, heads down doing the work. I saw that at the end, I want to say the end of that period of the girl boss movement, as many of those women started to fall from those pedestals, and some in very harsh falls, like in terms of the way they left their companies. The media was just as voracious as going after them and telling these horror stories about them. And still, to a certain extent, Black women were kind of left out of that narrative, even though some of the same things were happening to us. So when I saw what happened with Dr. Gay at Harvard University, it put really some clear ideas around what was happening to us. And I saw it in other places, not just in tech, not just in business. I saw the similar phenomena happening even in the entertainment industry, where Black women are climbing this ladder, trying to be successful in our careers. And as we're climbing and we're achieving these goals, we are invisible. And we're not focused on, we're not given the accolades that our peers are. But when we reach that glass cliff and that glass ceiling, and then for whatever reason we may fall or we may encounter challenges, it's much more heightened hyper visibility around our failures. And I think we saw an example of that, for better or worse, in terms of what led Dr. Gay to being on that stage. That is actually what happened to her. She was elevated to a glass cliff, and I want to say she was kind of pushed over the side of it in a way. And then, there was a feeding frenzy once she made that fall. And I think this happens far too often to Black women leaders than I see even to our Black male counterparts. I don't see that as bad to a certain extent as it happens to us, because we don't often get the second chance. We have to claw our way back, and try to rebuild our reputations. And we still have the same skill sets and the talents, but getting back to a place where we can actually utilize those is much more difficult for us. And so when I saw what happened with Dr. Gay, I had been writing about it and not thinking that that would be the outcome. And immediately when, it was announced, the couple days after I saw that, I saw that announcement, I immediately talked to my writing coach and editor. I was like, oh no, I got to write it now. And I hurried and, continued to write this. That really came from my heart, because I was like, I have been talking to so many women, Black women and leaders who have experienced some of the same challenges and difficulties that I have, that Dr. Gay has, and no one is talking about us. We are not seen. And I believe it is important for our voices to be heard in this story. And I feel that it's important for us to call a thing and call out the systemic issues that we are facing that are impacting us like nobody else.
But how do we protect ourselves and then still be fearless and bold and kind of drive innovation? How can you do both?
I think it's important that we learn how to be our own, how would I say this? We need to learn how to embrace and be each other's safe space. And for me, I think some of the most soul crushing and challenging things for me, as I've had challenges within my journey, is that sometimes there have been Black women on the other side of my battle, and that is a problem for me, that we are now using the master's tools against each other, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. We should be each other's safe space and respite. And even if we're not in opposition to each other, if you see that this injustice is happening to our sisters, we have to stand up and call that out. And so when I wrote that article, and I before I even penned my article or published that article, I was on LinkedIn and social media, like elevating the voices of women that were writing. Like I had a whole thread, like where I would elevate, I would see a post, elevate it, see someone else write a post, elevate it. Because I believe there is power in community, the communion of other Black women. And once we learn that, I think that this decades of being here on this continent and being separated and being tactically, and I think intentionally, pitted against each other has made us see that no, that's not the way for us to move forward. Collectively, we have to hold each other, and we have to hold space for each other that connects and protects us, so that we can live to fight another day.
So it sounds like you're saying there are two different paths for women in leadership, and Black women are on a different path.
Mm-hmm.
I think I know the answer to this, but can allyship help that?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. I can never say that allyship is not important. I think it's vitally important. When I think of, the work that I have done in the past, having allies, male allies, other women allies, white, Black, Hispanic, you name it. An ally. I don't even really like. I like the word accomplice a little bit more than
Ah.
allies. And I can't take credit for you saying that. I've heard someone else saying, I was like, yeah, that's it. The folks that have helped me as accomplices to achieving goals, those are folks that I don't really care how they show up and what physical manifestation. It's like, do we have this shared vision and mission of what's right in the world? And are you going to rock with me and getting that, moving the needle in that way? And that person is the person I'm going to run with. And so, yeah, I think it's a very important role for it to have an ally, an accomplice in the fight. And I think it's even vital because no matter what we do, like there are going to be places, there are going to be rooms, there are going to be conversations that you and I are not privy to. And we need somebody to be in that room to call our name, to say, hey, give Kimberly another look. Why don't you look at what Candice is doing in her work? Candice is someone that you need to call. And having those folks that are moving, and making space for us when we can't, I think is the only way that we really piece by piece start to make these incremental gains.
So it sounds like you've got kind of a group of accomplices and allies, but also are there people who also support you on the mentorship side? So, who's your girl gang? Kind of describe like what those roles are for the women who have helped to empower your leadership style.
hmm Well, I think some things that this is something that I always use, a term that I would use quite a bit within Black Girls Code when we would talk about how our girls engage with mentorship. And I would always say that some things are taught and others are caught by observance. So I feel that now that I am actually similar in that way. There's some there. I have a close circle of women that are leading in all different industries that I go to. Like when I say, hey, this is something I'm working on, or this doesn't feel quite right. Some of them are formal coaches, some of them are not. They're just other businesswomen. But I also learn so much just by observing, just by looking at other women that are out there doing what they do and saying, okay, this is how I like how she did that. I like how she said that. And I would say for me, one of those women that I watch and observe and how they move, like that's you, Candice. It's like I watch all the things that you have achieved and accomplished, with Black Tech Week and the work that you're doing in venture. Like you're certainly on my list of women that I look up to and admire and try to model and take some of the things that I see from a leadership perspective and
Back at you, Kimberly. Back at you.
Thank you.
Yeah, back at you. To even be included in the list of some of the women you've talked about is it really does mean a lot. So I appreciate those words.
You
Can you kind of share a pivotal moment in your leadership journey where you kind of had to stop and just be fearless and run with it?
Yeah. I would say, easily, the one of the most, I want to say, significant times when I've been fearless in my leadership journey was even um, going that route of trying to be a startup founder, but then pivoting and starting this nonprofit organization that would become a standard in the ed tech world around Black girls and coding. I was not planning. I've told this story 1,000 times. I was not planning on starting a nonprofit, had no interest in starting a nonprofit. But I saw an issue that wasn't being addressed, and I made the decision to pivot and focus on addressing it. I would say, additive to that, during the pandemic and being in that role at that time and having to figure out how to lead in the middle of a disaster was another time where I really had to be fearless. I remember still, that pre-pandemic time and after pandemic time, but during the pandemic, I'm sitting in my house in San Francisco and listening to sirens go up and down the street at all hours of the night, ambulances, and thinking all of the worst thoughts one can think. And still having to get up the next day and talk to a team and comfort a team and lead a team and figure out how to make sure that I could keep my team. And so I think about, leading through that moment and then coming out on the other side of that moment with all of this, international support for our work, was a time where I had to lead, and even leading through a time when I didn't know like what the outcomes may be. That organization shifted from a totally in-person, 100% in-person organization to a virtual organization, both from a staffing perspective and from a program delivery model. We've never done that before. So that was totally shifting the model on a dime, and building even a more impact globally with the work that we were doing that people said we couldn't do. Like, and
Yeah.
we
How do you lead when you don't know what you're doing?
like, we didn't know. We just had to figure it out because we had no choice. We had no choice because we had to do it. And I don't mean we had no choice in terms of if we didn't do this thing, the organization was going to shut its doors, because I knew exactly how much money we had in the bank, and I knew that I could get through the storm for at least that whole year. But what really drove us to turn on the dime and figure out a way to innovate and create these virtual programs was because our community needed us. So those families were sending us emails and saying, what do we do? Like, my girls are at home and they're bored, and can you all help us? And, girls were emailing us. So we stepped to the plate because of the community and trying to provide some space for the community to just survive and weather this storm and keep them engaged, as well as to keep our staff motivated around this mission that we thought when we held so closely in our hearts. So we had to do that because our community needed us to. And so we had to just figure it out. It was really walking into the unknown and just trusting that the Creator would guide our path, because it was a righteous one. And it did end up that way. So when I look back at that period of time, and literally the organization as it exists in the form that it does now is really surviving on the platform and the foundation that was created in that moment. For better or worse, that makes me proud, because I'm like, okay,
Absolutely.
like, I did that. So
Yes,
now
you did.
you all keep going. But I built that house, and, like, you're living on the foundation and the embers that, what we nailed in piece by piece.
So with the program you're running today, how are you teaching those founders to be better leaders? It's sometimes
Mm.
difficult to really, tech founders can be a lot. They can be a lot, and I've been doing this for a few years, and you've been around tech founders for quite a few years, and you're also an angel investor. So, what learnings have you had over the years through your angel investing, and how are you applying some of that to teach the folks within your sphere how to be better leaders?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think I would answer it in two ways. So
Okay.
there's the leaders and those of us that support those leaders. And so I just did a sort of like an interview series with an organization, another accelerator that was interviewing some for fellows like last week. And we had this whole list of fellows, about 10 different teams that came through and pitched, and we interviewed them. We took them through the series of tests, and then we evaluated them. And at the end, when we were doing that evaluation, one of the things for me that I felt it was very important to do was to say, to kind of shatter that notion that there is a stereotype of that there is one way to lead. There is one primary model of what leadership looks like, because leadership looks different. And so I think this notion of pattern matching in the tech industry, and in particular in startup, has become so prevalent that when we evaluate, we are not even often aware of our biases are in play, because we're pattern matching to this leader. Oh, this person was too quiet, and this person was more dynamic and more. No, that doesn't mean that leader who's quiet and soft-spoken cannot move the needle and actually deliver this company. Like, and if we take a chance on what's a different pattern than what the pattern has normally been, why can't we take a chance sometime? So I think part of my goal is to sort of push on this narrative that's been created in the Valley, that leaders and companies that are investable look all the same way, and the leaders of those companies look all the same way, because I think they don't. And I think when we can have a contrarian notion, as we always say, and venture about what a good leader looks like, that's where we may be able to find some of those outliers and unicorns. But then I think on the other side for the founder, we talk a lot about resilience, but I think we need to make sure that our founders that are coming through, like for me, it's like telling them, like, listen, you are playing a long game here and you are going to go through some valleys, but you're going to have to be able to find whatever motivation you can to keep going, even when you don't have, don't know if you're gonna make payroll. I've been there. Like, you don't know if you're gonna make payroll the next day. Okay, we got to figure out how to solve these, get up so you can figure out how to solve these problems. And for me, when I think about my role and my journey as a founder and an innovator, the thing that has served me the best is having a strong spirit of resilience and being able to get up, like when you don't want to get up, and like you do the interview, like when you don't want to do the interview, to take the call when you don't want to take the call, like to where I was talking to the founder this morning, like put together your contact list and you need to work your list. I was like, I know I don't like to do operational stuff like that, but like I have to. So you got to call these people, you got to cultivate these relationships. But if you're not resilient and you don't cultivate that spirit of resilience, you won't last, because it is a very hard and lonely journey to the top.
No, it absolutely is. And, many times we're the only, or we're, that one woman in the room too. And it's a very interesting industry to be in, and it's incredibly male dominated. And again, like you just said, there's pattern matching, and a lot of that pattern is toward pale males,
Mhm.
as my spouse calls them in AI.
Right.
And so, should women lead differently than men? Or should we lead like we lead? Or is there a model on either side?
I,
Um,
I
you know,
say no. So like I say no, but also kind of yes. So like I do think there are traits that women bring into our leadership personas that tend to be more readily identified with women in leadership. Yes, that is true. But I think that I just kind of push back on the notion of like this is a male trait and this is a trait of women in leadership, because those are the biases that generally get utilized against us. So like when women are
absolutely.
direct and when women are assertive as business leaders, if it was a male, they'd be like, oh, man, he's a go-getter. But if it's a woman, it's like, oh, no, she's too aggressive. They don't even use assertive. Then it becomes aggressive. So I think breaking those stereotypical framing of how people lead is important, because that's the way we kind of level the playing field. But I think the ability as women that we have cultivated over centuries, to multitask, to be innovative, because we have to do that when we're both running a household and a business at the same time. We have cultivated these skills out of necessity. And so I think being able to build community is something that women have cultivated over centuries. Those are things that we can bring into how we lead and utilize those as our strengths, in ways that sometimes our male peers cannot. But also, these are things that both men and women should adopt, because I think to this next generation, this Gen Z, and I think now are we on Gen Alpha, their expectations on how leadership looks and how power is held is very different. And if we all, both men and women, don't evolve to meet this next generation's expectations, I don't think that we're going to see much success in really being able to continue to this pace of innovation that we've experienced over the last several decades.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, it's the way we look at all things, the way we look at gender has changed. The way we've looked at sexuality, the way we look at lots of things has just changed over time. And Gen Alpha is growing up in a world where, not only do they have the phone and the internet and artificial intelligence and climate
Mhm.
change and all of these things, but they have different expectations around how people can lead them through that challenge. Um,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that brings us to really collaborative leadership. So,
Mhm.
what kind of collaborative leadership models can we use kind of to drive innovation?
Well, I think when I think of this term of collaborative leadership, I know that I have seen a lot lately around organizations that develop this co CEO model. I've seen it quite a bit on the nonprofit side. I'm actually seeing it on the for profit side a bit as well. And I think those creative approaches to shared leadership and how power is held is interesting. I have never done it, but I do find it.
I don't know if I could co
I don't know
CEO.
if I could. I don't know if I could either, but I still find it fascinating because I think it kind of began to our previous, train of conversation. It kind of gets to like this generation is looking for different expectations from their leaders, especially in regard to how power is held. And so, seeing these organizations that are creating these models that have this shared holding of power and two CEOs, or maybe shared holding of power throughout the organizational staff from a leadership, I think is a very interesting approach, and more innovative models like that should be explored. I also think, this ability to create mentorship opportunities throughout your organizational stack, so that you can grow talent within. But I think that comes with being very clear about what the intention is. Like, are you trying to grow leadership within your organization so that people can grow and go, or are they growing and staying in place and then creating the next journey for the organization? But I think that kind of leads us to a discussion of how we might create collaboration within the team so that that type of leadership development can happen within house. I think, the last thing I would say on that is, we're in an interesting period where people are interested in having lots of conversation, but we don't necessarily know how to navigate conversation amongst each other. And this is in business or without, when there's friction and disagreement. And I don't know. I'm still challenged with understanding that piece of it, because okay, everybody wants to have a voice and have a say and engage in this robust debate. But what do we do when there's a disagreement and friction? And friction creates energy, right? That's just engineering me. That's how you create that friction. That is when you start to move things forward. And so I think when I think of creating a collaborative model within an organization, is figuring out or building in tools and that allows you to have creative disagreement within your organization that leads you to answers and leads you to solutions that can move your organization forward. But that's not a skill that I believe, that we have very much mastered yet in business. And I think that is something that we have to interrogate. Like, can we learn how to disagree in a way that we don't lose our connections to each other and the work that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, we've gotten to a place in the world where everybody's got a megaphone, but they don't have a pair of headphones on to hear what the other person is saying. And so it's a
Right.
lot of talking, but not a lot of conversation. And we've got to get to a place where we can start hearing each other again.
Yeah.
Kimberly, thank you so much for this conversation today. Thank you for taking the time. Where can we find you online so that we can follow more of your journey?
You can definitely find me online on all social media. I kind of go by the same thing on my personal social media. Yeah, 6GEMS, GEMS, but also the blackinnovationlab.org. You can find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn under Kimberly Bryant, as well as on Black Innovation Lab. You can find me under Ascend Ventures, and just follow us in our work. And we're always looking to collaborate and like really grow this movement to support Black founders.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Candice.